Right now, you are cozy and warm, and you didn't even have to try. The central heat just works. There is a coat hanging by your door you didn't have to hunt and kill to make. There is fresh food in your pantry that will still be there next week, no matter how freezing it gets out there. Now, strip all of that away. Imagine just your bare skin and a winter so brutal it could easily freeze you to death in your sleep. Before you could even wake up, that was once totally normal, not just for one bad winter, but for hundreds of thousands of brutal years. Your ancestors fought through massive, frozen ice ages, where giant sheets of ice swallowed entire continents, and the freezing cold could kill a human in just a few hours. Somehow, they survived. You are the living proof. Every single one of them lived long enough to pass their genes down to you. That means every last one of them won a battle against freezing winters they simply could not lose. So, how did they pull it off? How does a soft, hairless mammal that evolved in the warm African heat survive the most brutal ice age weather this planet has ever thrown at humanity? That is what I want to tell you, because it is one of the greatest prehistoric survival stories we have, and barely anyone knows how close humans came to going completely extinct. Let us be honest about what our ancestors were facing, because calling it winter makes it sound like a chilly afternoon around a warm campfire. It was nothing like that. The peak of the last ice age, around 26 to 19,000 years ago, ice locked down massive parts of Europe, Asia, and North America. The terrain was flat, frozen, and barren, with absolutely nothing to block the wind. Trees were incredibly scarce, wild food vanished for months on end, and early humans just are not built for that. We evolved in warm climates, and our bodies still act like it. We lack thick insulating fur. We do not have a thick layer of blubber like a seal. We cannot slow our heart rate to hibernate through the extreme cold. Like a bear, strip a person of their clothes. In freezing cold, they had hours, not days. The body shuts down, and that's it. The local wildlife was actually built for the freeze. Mammoths had fat and fur. Cave bears hibernated, while reindeer could just walk away to somewhere warmer. Early humans had none of that. On paper, we should have been among the first to die when the temperature dropped. Wrong body, wrong place, worst timing ever. But we had brains that could plan, and hands that could build whatever our bodies lacked, and that turned out to be enough, just barely. There wasn't just one single trick that saved us, but a whole series of small wins. Each one solved a deadly problem before it killed us. So, how did they actually pull it off? It started with fire. Nothing works without it. So that is our starting point. Humans had actually used fire for a very long time, maybe 300 to 400,000. By the Ice Age, fire wasn't just a luxury, it was absolute life itself, and they were absolute masters. Researchers digging up ice age hearths in Ukraine expected to find basic, simple campfires. Instead, they discovered highly engineered fireplaces, and one of them burned at over 600 degrees Celsius. That's hotter than 1100 degrees Fahrenheit. When wood grew scarce on the open tundra, they burned animal fat and bones. Fire gave them warmth, cooked food, hardened their tools, and stretched the daylight when the sun barely rose. Next, they figured out how to carry warmth. The catch with fire is you cannot take it everywhere. Walk away, and the biting cold rushes right back. So, we did what no other creature could manage. We stole the warmth from other beasts and wore it ourselves. At first, it was simple. Just raw skin slung over shoulders. And get this wild fact, humans were skinning bears for fur in freezing northern Europe at least 300,000 years ago. See, we know this from cut marks left on ancient bear paw bones, right where you would slice to peel a hide off clean. Those bear hides made wind and waterproof winter cloaks, but loose skins still leaked heat through the gaps, which just won't cut it. In a brutal ice age, the fix came around 30,000 years ago, and it's so small it sounds almost silly. They needle just a thin sliver of bone or ivory, with a tiny eyelet drilled through. One expert even called it maybe the most vital invention in all human history. And He makes a great point. It meant you could sew fitted clothes, sealing seams, adding layers, and sleeves closed at the wrist. Wearing a basic blanket versus a fitted coat are two totally different things, and that little needle bridged the gap. Early modern humans had much better fitting gear than Neanderthals, and that simple edge might have pulled us through the Ice Age. But they didn't stop at fur. Deer hides blocked the biting wind and stayed soft for warm mittens and waterproof boots. And before stepping out into the freeze, hunters smeared rich animal fat called tallow on their faces and necks. It sealed their pores, trapped their body heat, and kept the wind from stealing warmth away. Highly effective, if a bit gross. But out on the blinding snow, another danger lurked that we often forget about snow blindness, that intense glare off the snow can literally blind you. So, hunters carved narrow slits into bone or wood, strapping them over their eyes. Those tiny slits blocked out most of the glare. The world's first sunglasses, built from bone. Most people picture cavemen shivering inside deep, dark caves, but reality is cooler than that. They actually built their own homes right out on the frozen tundra over in what is now Ukraine and Russia. There were zero caves and barely any wood. So, they used the only thing lying around everywhere: giant mammoth bones. At a site called Mazirik, they discovered round shelters built almost entirely from mammoth bones and tusks. Heavy skulls and leg bones went into the ground as foundations. Ribs and tusks curved up to make the frame. We are talking hundreds of bones per house. These were sunk deep into the ground and packed with hides, moss, and soil, which trapped the heat well enough to keep the whole family cozy. The largest one is 18,000 years old, dating right from the absolute coldest ice age, and they clearly kept returning here again and again for hundreds of years. That is some of the oldest architecture we have ever discovered, building homes from giants, and the engineering was clever in ways you would never guess. Many winter homes used a cold trap entrance, with the doorway dug lower than the sleeping area. Cold air is heavy, so it sank into the entryway and stayed there, while the warm air rose to where the family slept. They figured this out tens of thousands of years before anyone wrote down how physics worked. They also used snow, which sounds backwards until you understand it. See, snow is an incredible insulator. Pile thick walls of it around a shelter and the interior stays close to freezing even when temperatures outside plunge to 30 below. Long before anyone built the first igloo, humans already knew that under a snowbank was way warmer than out in the freezing open air above, where you built mattered. 2. People in forests had it much easier than those in the open, because a thicket of trees blocks a massive amount of wind. Walking through the woods on a brutal day is surprisingly calm compared to standing in an open field, and instead of using modern caulk on drafty gaps, they stuffed those cracks with moss, mud, and sticky pine pitch. That gooey sap sealed every single crack super tight. Staying warm meant surviving the night. The winter has a slower killer hunger. For months, you couldn't find anything to forage, and hunting was tough, so they became experts at preserving food beforehand. Whenever they took down a massive animal, they didn't just feast, they saved it. The freezing weather did half the work, chilling the meat so it lasted for weeks. They smoked meat, made plenty of jerky, and saved dried berries. They hid food in deep pits dug into the ground or cool, earthy root cellars where nature kept everything cold and safe until spring. There is even proof they weighed giant mammoth meat down and sank it in icy ponds to preserve it, sort of like a natural refrigerator. None of this required electricity or mechanical parts that could break. It wouldn't fail like a modern freezer in a blizzard, and they wasted absolutely nothing. Every single piece of the animal got used. They got skilled at extracting every last calorie from a carcass, which is hard to imagine today. When we toss out half of the groceries we buy, their hunting was highly coordinated. 2. Over in eastern France, near a massive limestone cliff, Ice Age hunters teamed up with fire to drive entire herds of wild horses and reindeer straight into a natural trap. Not once, but for thousands of years. At that same exact spot, hunt big, dry the meat, and store it for winter. That strategy is exactly how they survived. Here is something we often overlook. These ancestors fully expected winter. Their entire year was centered around prepping for it. We are the ones who get blindsided today. We just take for granted the grid will work. So when a massive storm hits, we are surprised. They were never caught off guard. A massive part of their year was preparing. And they leaned on each other way more. People packed into one space than we would ever tolerate, squeezed into tiny spaces on purpose. It was deliberate. Body heat is a powerful heat source when you crowd enough people extremely close. Having your own room back then wasn't lucky. You were freezing and exposed. It was usually the folks living alone, especially the elders, who died first in a brutal cold snap. There was nobody nearby to share life-saving warmth, but that does not mean Ice Age tribes were always peaceful. Surviving was brutally hard. Resources were scarce, and sometimes humans became a threat to each other. We actually know for a fact that some ancient humans turned to cannibalism to survive when food became scarcer than an honest politician. Ice Age clans had absolutely no choice but to turn to some truly desperate measures for survival. They also used livestock for warmth. In the worst medieval winters across Europe and Russia, peasants brought livestock, like cows and sheep, right inside the ground floor of their homes. These animals radiated a massive amount of heat, rising up to warm the whole family. Living directly above, you basically lived right on top of your furnace, except the heater was a cow. Sometimes the freeze was so deep that human bodies adapted. Take the Yagan people at the southern tip of South America, who lived in freezing climates while wearing almost zero clothes. To survive that, their bodies ran much hotter than ours, generating more heat from within. They also used a deep squatting stance to rest, which tucked in their arms and legs, slashing the amount of heat they lost. Their defense against freezing temperatures wasn't coats. Their own internal thermostat was cranked way up. And then comes the wildest theory of all. Is it possible some early humans survived the winter in a crazy way, like by hibernating at a Spanish dig called the Pit of Bones? Researchers analyze ancient human ancestors from some 430,000 years back. During a brutal ice age, their bones look bizarre. The wear on them comes in regular seasonal cycles. We see growth abruptly stopping and starting, showing they barely saw the sun. Even teenagers had their development paused. It is the exact same pattern seen in hibernating species when the entire body slows down, stops taking food, and starts consuming its own fat. Researchers think these early humans, lacking enough rich, fatty foods to survive a bitter winter, may have retreated into deep caves and slowed their systems down into a deep, heavy sleep to wait it out. It is not proven. Plenty of experts disagree and argue there are other reasons for that skeletal damage. We obviously cannot hibernate like that today, but the concept is fascinating enough that top minds are still debating it today. So, your ancient relative sleeping through winter like grizzlies is not something we can dismiss easily. For hundreds of thousands of years, surviving until spring was never a sure bet. Every freezing cold winter was a test. You either passed or die. Here is the part that blows my mind. In a few thousand years, which is barely a blink, on this grand timeline, we went from stacking mammoth bones for shelter to clicking a switch for warmth. The deadliest threat our prehistoric families faced is now a minor annoyance. We went about on our walk to a warm vehicle. We conquered winter so thoroughly that most of us forgot it was even a struggle. We were losing